Uh, my dear friends, Scott Ritter is my dear guest. So, Scott, welcome to the Periscope Depth Show. How's it going?
Things are going well here. Yourself?
Yes, thank you. The same for me. Well, a lot of very interesting and intriguing things in the news. Well, let's start with Western mainstream media, which now reports that Russian army is successful, Ukrainian army is unsuccessful. There is no more cheering or claims, let's give Ukraine more weapons, let's give Ukraine more this or that. And there are opinions in the press, now I mean the Russian press, that Ukraine may soon be left the Afghanistan way by its Western allies. And there are opinions, and that, yes, Ukraine will be soon left alone with Russia. Also, Western allies say that they can reconcile Ukrainian terms of safety not earlier than 2024. What is this? Is this just when making believe that they are doing something and in fact they are not doing something, or what they are doing? So, what do you think? What do you make of it?
I think, frankly speaking, the only voice that counts in this entire matter is Russia and the Russian voice, and what Russia wants, what Russia's doing, what Russia is hoping to achieve. Ukraine and the West long ago lost the right to say we have a say in how this conflict ends. This conflict should have been over in March of last year, April of last year, when Russia had negotiated the terms of conflict termination. There was an agreement that would have brought an end to this war, that would have begun a process of not only bringing about peace, but paving the way for Russia to enact a broader agreement with the collective West about what the European security framework would look like. The West walked away. Ukraine walked away, and what we have today is the product of that decision. Over 560 days of war, hundreds of thousands of dead Ukrainians, tens of thousands of dead Russians. Russia having mobilized its manpower, partially, mobilized its defense industry to a large extent, and mobilized the nation, the will of the nation behind this conflict. The West doesn't have a vote, literally doesn't have a vote. The West can continue to provide military assistance if they want. Russia has shown what the solution to that decision is, which is a redoubling of Russian efforts to bring about a military victory against Ukraine. Ukraine can continue to articulate that it will fight, but what is it fighting for? It's fighting to the last Ukrainian, meaning that Russia will kill every Ukrainian that is put on the battlefield confronting Russian soldiers. That is the ultimate outcome of this fight. There's no other way to end this other than unconditional surrender. There won't be in my opinion, there won't and there can't be a negotiated termination of this conflict. Ukraine has foregone that right. Ukraine no longer gets to say how they want this war to end. Only Russia can say that. All Ukraine can say is, we want the war to end, and then hope that Russia gives them terms that are lenient enough to allow the Ukrainian nation to survive. The West doesn't get a vote. The West doesn't get to tell Russia how this war ends. The West started this war. The West is the one who gave arms to the Ukrainians and continues to give arms to the Ukrainians. The West is responsible for the deaths of tens of thousands of Russians. Tens of thousands of Russians died because of the West. Do you really think that Russia is going to say, West, please help us end this war. Russia doesn't need help ending this war. Russia will end this war with a Russian victory. This is the harsh truth. It'll happen on a timeline that's dictated by Russia. It won't be done to the benefit of the West. It won't be done for the convenience of the West. And it certainly won't be done in a way that preserves Ukraine as it currently exists. Russia spoke of 3 things that have to happen in order for this conflict to end. Ukraine can never be a member of NATO, ever. So any talk about ending a conflict so that the door can be opened for Ukrainian membership in NATO is absurd. Why do you think Russia is at war with Ukraine? It's because Ukraine wanted to be a member of NATO, and the unacceptable geopolitical ramifications of that for the national security of Russia. Russia's also insisted on demilitarization, that is, the destruction of all NATO influence on the Ukrainian military and the elimination of Ukrainian military as a potential threat to Russia. And what constitutes a threat has evolved over time. The Ukrainians are on a daily basis shelling civilian population centers in Russia, in the Donbass and elsewhere, in Crimea, killing civilians, murdering civilians, not as the unintended consequences of war. It's not as though Russia has placed military objects next to civilian places of residence, and this is collateral damage. Russian civilians are being deliberately targeted by Ukrainians, murdered by Ukrainians. This condition, this situation, this potential can never exist in a post-conflict world. Ukraine can never again have the ability to threaten the population of Russia. So demilitarization must take place. It'll be done the way Russia dictates it to be done. Ukraine doesn't get a vote. Ukraine doesn't get to say, no, we don't want this. If Ukraine says, no, we don't want this, the war continues, Ukrainians will be slaughtered. This is the harsh reality of the situation. Ukraine could have avoided this had they chosen peace. Denazification. Now, Russia has been somewhat ambiguous as to what this would be. But again, as a student of Russia, as somebody who's watched the Russian president over time, Vladimir Putin does not sit before the Russian people and play a movie showing the horrific crimes of Stepan Bandera, then link the Bandera movement to present-day Ukraine, and then walk away from that and pretend he never said that. The Russian president has put a marker on the table. The modern-day manifestation of Stepan Bandera, as it exists in Ukraine today, must be terminated, must be eliminated. That's what denazification is, which means that Ukraine is going to have to accept a post-conflict resolution similar to what Japan had to accept, unconditional surrender with a constitution that bans forever, in the case of Japan, Bushido-based militarism. In the case of Ukraine, the odious ideology of Stepan Bandera must be purged from their society forever. That's what termination of conflict will look like, in my belief. Again, I'm not a Russian. I'm just an observer. But when I take a look at all the data, all the facts, I can't see Russia going anywhere else with this. And I find it somewhat insulting that the West thinks they have a vote, they have a say. I was tickled by some news that came out the other day of a conversation between Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, and Olaf Scholz, the chancellor of Germany. They were, they keep calling Putin, keep calling him. And they were talking, they said, when I talk to him, he doesn't even talk about sanctions. He doesn't mention it at all. It's like he doesn't care. They're learning. He doesn't care. Sanctions don't matter. He won't talk. You made a decision. The sanctions are destroying you, France. The sanctions are destroying you, Germany. They're not destroying Russia. And so now these same arrogant, hubris-laced Western leaders think they can tell Putin how to end the war. Putin's not going to have that conversation. He doesn't care what France thinks. He doesn't care what Germany thinks. He doesn't care what America thinks. He doesn't care anymore because they have shown that they don't matter, because they cannot negotiate in good faith. Anything the West puts on the table must be seen as a lie, as a deception, not being genuine. So why would Russia ever sit down with the collective West today, individually or collectively, to talk about conflict termination in Ukraine? This war will end when Russia decides this war ends, and it'll only end on terms that are acceptable to Russia. Russia has paid too heavy of a price to give anything to Ukraine, to give anything to the West. Now, what the world will have to hope for, and I don't think it's vain hope, is that Russia will be a benevolent victor. Russia didn't enter this conflict to bring harm to the Ukrainian nation. They entered this conflict to preserve the cultural heritage and the lives of the ethnic Russian population of the Donbass, of Crimea, of New Russia. And I still believe that that is the ultimate objective. And again, this isn't my speculation. I listened to the words of the Russian president, and earlier this year when he spoke of what Russia's objectives are in the special military operation, he said the focus is on the restoration of social and economic life for the people of the newly acquired territories. This is a Russian president that is singularly focused on doing what is good for the Russian people and the Russian nation. He's not out to destroy Ukraine, destroy Europe, conquer the world. He's out to defend Russia. But this was a war that was hoisted on Russia by the collective West, by Ukraine. They started this war. The only thing they get to do to bring an end to this war is surrender unconditionally, no conditions.
And it doesn't look like that they're gonna end it. And if this keeps going on, so is there possibility, to your opinion, that Russia takes all of Ukraine body?
Well, I don't. Life is about humor. You know, when you're a firefighter, you come out of a really bad fire. You have morbid humor. You say things because otherwise you'd cry, you'd break down, you'd get sick. So you say jokes. In combat, it's the same thing. You talk about things in an irreverent fashion. So please forgive me, but the West saying they want a say in how this ends reminds me of the scene from Monty Python in The Search for the Holy Grail, where King Arthur meets the Black Knight on the bridge, and the Black Knight's going to challenge him for a fight. And one by one, King Arthur cuts off an arm, cuts off an arm, cuts off a leg, cuts off a leg, until the Black Knight is sitting there, legless, armless, still trying to fight. And that reminds me of Ukraine in the West in fighting Russia. This war will go on until the Black Knight can't fight anymore. And it doesn't matter if the Black Knight's still doing this. Ukraine is the Black Knight. They've lost an arm. If they want to continue to fight, they'll lose another arm. If they want to continue to fight, they'll lose a leg. And then they'll lose another leg. Now, in the movie, the Black Knight continues to live. But the reality is, any nation that loses its arms and its legs ceases to exist. And that's the danger Ukraine runs. But here's the thing, and it's come because I keep waiting, you keep waiting, everybody keeps waiting for the Ukrainian government to act rationally. No rational actor would allow what's happening to Ukraine to occur. They would have stopped this conflict a long time ago to preserve life, to preserve property, to preserve the physical integrity of the Ukrainian nation. So for this war to go on, we're not speaking of rational actors. We're speaking of irrational actors. And that, of course, is the definition of the Banderist ideology. I went back and read a very detailed history of Stepan Bandera and his movement. And I focused on the post-World War II, post-conflict Banderist ideology as it's taught here in America, as it's taught elsewhere by the diaspora. These are people who are willing to sacrifice everything for the vision of their notion of what the Ukrainian state would look like. And when I say everything, even the Ukrainian state, meaning that if the Ukrainian state can't exist as Stepan Bandera envisioned it in terms of racial and ideological purity, then it can't exist. It shouldn't exist. It can only exist in its pure form. Anything else is unacceptable and therefore shall and will be sacrificed. So when we look at Ukraine today, we have to understand that the Ukrainian nationalists aren't looking for a future that has a Ukrainian nation existing. They're looking for a future that has their Ukrainian nation existing. And if their Ukrainian nation can't exist, then Ukraine shouldn't exist. And they will be willing to fight until that one of those two outcomes are. And if their defeat is inevitable, as it is, that means they will fight until Ukraine no longer exists. So one of the risks here is that the longer this conflict goes on, the more likely it is that the Ukrainian state, especially as it currently exists, won't exist. What it ends up looking like, who knows? But it won't look like what it looks like today. And we know that today the map is fundamentally different than what the map looked like in 2014. The Ukrainian nationalists are responsible for the destruction of Ukraine, the physical destruction of Ukraine, not only in terms of homes, human lives lost, etc., but the territorial destruction of Ukraine, the elimination of territory from Ukraine. You know, Ukraine, Vladimir Putin also talked about this. It's an artificial state. Now, I know I've just insulted a million Ukrainians who say, no, it's not. It's a reality. It's a reality, except that when you have something that then has to have things appended onto it to make it something else, the something else is an artificiality. Ukraine had the opportunity to maintain and sustain this artificiality with the collapse of the Soviet Union. Russia, despite all of its reservations about how Ukraine looked in a post-Soviet world, swallowed their pride, swallowed their sense of historical being, and accepted a Ukraine that included Crimea, that included the Donbass. But the reality is, when you subject an artificiality to stress, it starts to fall apart. And that's what we see happening today. We see Ukraine collapsing because there is no national fabric that holds Ukraine together in a logical manner. There could have been, had the Ukrainians focused on inclusiveness. That means ethnic Russians are part of a large Ukrainian state as equals. But they didn't. They let the nationalists, the Banderas, dictate terms which say that the ethnic Russians are subhuman, not on par with the pure Western Ukrainian people. And as a result, we see this fracture happening. How does this end? Does Russia take Odessa? Does Russia take Kharkov? Does Russia take all the territory east of the Dnieper River? Does Poland make a move on Western Ukraine? Does Hungary make a move on the Transcarpathia region? Does Romania make moves on territories that it claims? What would be left of Ukraine? A rump state centered around Kiev with some farmland that produced grain that didn't have an outlet to the sea, that had a Europe that was resentful of Ukraine and therefore not willing to take Ukrainian grain, so it becomes this poor, impoverished third world state. That's the future of Ukraine, because they don't know what they had, they didn't respect what they had, and they have this perverted notion of what they should be. Ukraine was never going to be an ethnically pure country because it's a fake country. It's a country that had pieces added to it. And unless you accepted that, the totality of that, and then defined Ukrainian nationalism based upon that, what you're seeking can't be achieved by that. You alienate populations. The ethnic Russian population has been alienated from the notion of a Ukrainian state. Who believes today that the population of Crimea wants to be part of Ukraine? Who believes today that the ethnic Russians who reside in Odessa, knowing full well what happened in May 2014, want to be part of Ukraine, especially Ukraine that is governed and dominated by the very Banderist psychopaths that burned 48 of their brethren to death in the trade union building? Who in Mariupol wants to be part of Ukraine after what happened there when the Azov battalion went in there and raped, pillaged, murdered, burned? No one wants to be part of that. In Kharkov, who wants to be part of a Banderist-dominated Ukrainian nation that views them as subhumans? No one. No one wants to be part of that. Which is why this is probably the fate of Ukraine. The sad thing is, if Ukraine doesn't stop this war doesn't end until Russia destroys Ukraine. Not that Russia wants to destroy Ukraine. And that's where we're at today. It's a very sad state of affairs. But that's realism. That's reality. Ukraine had the opportunity to end this conflict. The West had an opportunity to end this conflict. Today, as you said in the Western media, they're starting to realize that this conflict is lost. But they continue to be confused about what influence they have on conflict termination. You can't provoke a fight, prevent the fight from being terminated, and then at the moment you're getting beat, say, we want to change everything. No. You stepped into the ring for a 15-round championship fight. It's round 12. Your ribs are broken. Your nose is smashed. Your eyes are bleeding. Your eardrums have been ruptured. You're having trouble breathing. Your legs are weak. And you want to call it a draw? That ain't going to happen. The champ's putting you down. You're going down for the count. That's where Russia is today. And I don't think Russia's happy about this. I think this is tragic. I think the Russian government is sickened by this. Not by their actions, but by what Ukraine and the West have done and compelled them to do. But you have to finish the fight. You have to. Because if Russia doesn't put the Ukrainian nation down, if it doesn't bring about denazification, if it doesn't bring about demilitarization, if it allows the West to dictate terms of conflict termination that create the potential of NATO membership in the future, then Russia will have to do this all over again in 10 years, in 20 years. It will have to be done all over again. And if that's the case, then the Russian government has failed the Russian people.